Hi guys and welcome back to the Bike Cave. About 3 years ago I started building this bike so as to have a more versatile bike that would allow me to hit some mountain bike trails as well as doing some of the tricks I really like. To sum up what I've done up to now with that project, it was about 3 years ago when I got this dirt bike and I turned it into a 4-cross mountain bike by combining some brand new parts with some parts I had already laying around in the Bike Cave. Also, I had shared some cool bike hacks as I was building this bike, and so if you haven't watched the previous videos of this project and you want to take everything from the beginning, you will find the relevant links in the description below. However, I haven't shared with you what I've done over the past couple of years to finish this bike project, and so today we're going to do a quick catch up on that. By the way, my training related goals regarding this bike build was to be able to diversify my riding a bit by adding non-trial training sessions to my weekly schedule, and I really enjoyed whenever I managed to ride it. But I'll discuss about the training aspect of riding this mountain bike in a future video. For now, I want to focus on some bike hacks I've done over the past couple of years in order to set up this bike how I wanted it. So to begin with, one of the problems that I had with this bike when I first built it was that being a quite small bike, I had to pull the dropper post as much as I could out of the seat cube. This meant that I had to over-tighten the seat post collar a lot to make sure that the dropper post wouldn't slip into the seat cube. But doing so, I was exceeding the recommended tightening torque of the dropper post and it couldn't work properly, so I had to find a way to make it work. The solution that I found was to get a cheap regular seat post, cut it to length and insert it to the seat cube to act as an actual obstacle for the dropper post and stop it from going into the seat cube without over-tightening it. I know that this wouldn't be feasible if I had a dropper post that had been designed for internal routing, but my frame doesn't support internal routing, and so I was okay with this approach. However, I had to do two things that will allow me to take it out whenever I want to in the future. Firstly, I cut the seat post in a way to keep its upper solid part, and then I created a thread on that end. This will allow me to use that thread to extract the seat post from the seat cube whenever I want to in the future. The second trick I did is to use a lot of anti-seize grease as I was inserting it into the frame. I did so as my frame is made out of steel and the seat post I used is made out of aluminum, and as we've already discussed in the past, whenever two dissimilar metals are being assembled together, they tend to corrode due to galvanic corrosion. So the use of anti-seize grease can prevent galvanic corrosion and make the removal of this additional seat post feasible whenever I decide to do it in the future. Another thing that I changed on the bike since I initially built it is that I installed the rock lock to remotely lock the suspension fork. It's not a bike hack, I know, but I already had the rock lock lever, and so I decided to upgrade the fork by installing the relevant kit. I like that I now had the option to remotely lock the suspension on my bike, but the way that the cable leaves the rock lock controller made the cables on my cockpit even messier. So next I decided to do a bit of cable management, and to begin with that, I had to deal with my brakes and replace the pistons of my levers with some titanium ones I had ordered. Long story short, when I decided to use these brakes that I had sitting around since 2016, I realized that they had plastic pistons and apparently they had been swollen up and they couldn't work properly. So the first time I rebuilt these brakes I had to modify the pistons to make them work, and as I had mentioned in the relevant video, I immediately ordered some titanium pistons to use them the next time I would decide to rebuild these brakes. Thus, now that I decided to make the cables on my cockpit a bit shorter and generally neater, I should also address the piston issue. This was just a matter of taking the levers apart, replacing the pistons and their seals, and then assembling everything back together. These titanium pistons work just great, and I'm so happy that my levers have been upgraded and I will never face the usual issue again, as it's quite obvious that the titanium pistons cannot change their dimensions over time and get stuck into their lever. Also, the last time I bled these brakes I did a bike hack to preserve the dot brake fluid by vacuum sealing it to ice to avoid any contact with the humidity in the air until I want to use it again. I think it finally worked, as the vacuum bags were still sealed and no air had been leaked into them. Once I've managed to replace the pistons and rebuild the levers, I had to cut the cables and the hoses and make the cockpit a bit neater. To do so, I used a heavy-duty braided shrink fit sleeve to group the hoses and the cables together. A bike hack that I did to make the cables looking even better was to use a 90-degree cable bend that is usually used on V-brakes to change the angle that the cable leaves the rock lock controller that I had already installed. This made the cable management easier, and after grouping the cables and the brake hoses, the final result is as good as it can get. The next thing that I've done on my 4-cross bike, and I would like to discuss it with you, is that I decided not to go tubeless and keep using inner tubes. I decided that as I didn't want to mess with sealant on a bike that is not meant to be used regularly and may stay for weeks without moving. Also, inner tubes are more familiar to me, and at least for now, I feel more comfortable to keep using them. However, this bike is built to be ridden on mountain bike trails, and so I need to have a bit of protection against punctures. So I decided to install inserts that are meant to be used with inner tubes to get protected as much as possible. The inserts I got give me a total of 15mm protection, and to be honest with you, I've never had a puncture since I started using them a couple of years ago. However, these inserts add a bit of weight to the periphery of the wheel, and you may feel it while you ride. So in order to reduce the rotating mass of the wheel, I decided to use the lightest TPU inner tube I could find online, and actually this made quite a difference compared to when I was using a standard inner tube. The final thing that I did on this bike is not an actual bike hack anymore, as it's a common practice for many riders. So as I already mentioned in a short video on my social media accounts, I decided to wax my chain. I wanted a solution that it would be long lasting, as maintenance free as possible, and also high performance at any riding conditions. So chain waxing was the best possible solution. Chain waxing implies that the molten wax is getting deep into the chain links and the rollers, and at the same time sticks on the surface of the chain, protecting the chain from the elements while lubricating it for a very long time. The wax I use is a high performance microcrystalline wax with PTFE and tungsten disulfide as additives, and I got it from Hagen Automation. The macrocrystalline structure of the wax makes it a bit more flexible, stickier and more durable, and supposedly it's going to last for more than 1000 kilometers before I need to rewax my chain. Also, the additives makes the wax layer very slippery and the chain feels and shifts a lot smoother. I'm riding this finalized setup for more than 6 months now, and I'm so happy that I finally finished with this bike, and I've done whatever I could to make it as versatile and as maintenance free as possible. The only thing that I don't really like on this bike is that the rear cassette hub is quite old and it doesn't have a lot of engagement points. This discourages me from trying trialsy tricks on this bike, but I'm not planning to replace it soon. At least for now, I'm going to keep it as is and use it as a mountain bike in order to diversify my riding while working a bit on my riding endurance. But I'm curious, what do you think about this bike? Do you like it? What would you change on it? Also, please let me know if you want me to expand on any of the topics or the bike hacks we discussed today. That's it for today, guys, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Also, I hope you found some of the bike hacks useful for your own bike projects. Thanks so much for subscribing and watching, and until next time, have fun riding your bikes. Bye!